The scream split the frozen moor like an axe through green wood. 3 brothers had her pinned to the cold stone floor of the longhouse. But something inside Khora Greytusk broke for good that night. Broke clean and quiet, the way a frost-bitten branch snaps without warning. Miles off, on a ridge where the wind came down mean and sideways, a stranger at a dying fire lifted his head. Most folks would have minded their own business. Silas Crowe wasn't most folks. And before that night was through, 3 orcs were going to answer for what they'd done. She had not meant to scream. Khora had promised herself that much, lying awake the past 4 nights. I will not give them the satisfaction. But when Grull's knee came down on the small of her back, and Borv pinned her wrists, and Dak the baby, the one she'd taught to skin a hare, looked away instead of pulling them off, the sound tore out of her before she could swallow it. Raw, furious, ashamed of itself. "There it is," Grull said, almost gentle, the way you'd speak to a calf you were about to brand. "Get it all out, sister. Then we'll talk like family." Family. The word had stopped meaning anything around the 2nd winter after their parents went into the burial cairn, about when Grull started calling the hold his hold and the herd his herd, and her a mouth I'm tired of feeding. She was 22, by orc reckoning that made her old enough to swing an axe in the clan musters, old enough to dig a grave, and, apparently, old enough to be sold. "Vergath rides up at first light," Grull went on, settling his weight like he had all the time in the world. "You'll be at the gate, you'll be smiling, and you'll put your hand in his and say the bond words, or so help me, I will break every soft thing left in you until there's nothing to do but smile." That was the part the songs never warned you about. The cruelty wasn't loud. It was patient. It had a reasonable voice. So Khora stopped fighting. She felt the 3 of them ease back the way men do when they think they've won. That little exhale, that loosening. And in that loose half-second, with her cheek against the floor and her mother's cold cook fire, 2 feet from her face, she did 3 things very fast. She bit down on Borv's thumb until she tasted copper. She drove an elbow into Grull's gut hard enough to fold him. And she came up off that floor with her father's war axe, the big single bit over the hearth that nobody but her had touched since the old orc died. Already in her 2 hands. The longhouse went dead quiet. "Khora." Grull straightened, one hand to his belly, and to his credit he didn't look afraid. He looked insulted. "Put it down." "You first," she said. "Put your face down. In the dirt, where I'm fixing to leave it." Good orc talk. Their father would have laughed at it. But her arms were shaking and they could all see it. And Grull smiled because he saw it too. So she didn't wait for the math to come out against her. She grabbed her hunting bow and quiver off the wall peg, kicked the door open with a bare heel, and ran out into the dark. Past the byre where the tuskbacks grumbled. Past the cairn where her mother and father slept under cold stones. Out onto the open moor, with no boots and no plan, and a heart going like a war drum gone mad. Behind her Grull bellowed. Borv cussed about his thumb. And Doc, this was the part that would stay with her. Doc said, "Small and useless. We didn't have to do it like that." And Grull told him to shut his mouth and saddle the boars. Khora ran. The moor in early spring was a cruel place to run barefoot. The heather had teeth, and the cold came up through her soles and tried to climb her shin bones. But she'd hunted this ground her whole life, and her body remembered the safe lines even when her head was nothing but white noise. And that one reasonable voice, going, "You'll be smiling. You'll be smiling." At the top of the first rise, she knocked an arrow and loosed it straight up into the black. A long, hissing, pointless thing. An old hunter's signal that meant, "I see you and I am armed," though there was nobody to see it but the stars. 5 arrows left, 1 axe, a sleeping shift and bare bleeding feet. She had never in her life been this free or this finished, and the 2 felt almost identical. The Greytusk hold had been dying for years before Grull decided to sell his sister to fix it. It had been a good hold once. Old Rune ran the tuskback herd to the high pasture every spring and came home smelling of wet wool and snowmelt. Their mother kept the longhouse warm, and the 4 children fed and somehow halfway honest. Orcs aren't a soft people. The stories outsiders tell make them all tusks and tempers and the occasional eaten messenger. But there's a kind of orc tenderness that shows up in hard work done for somebody else's sake, and the Greytusk longhouse had been full of it. Then the bone fever came through the borderlands 2 winters running, and took both the old ones inside a season of each other, and the tenderness went into the cairn with them. What was left? 3 brothers, a sister, a herd too big for the land, and a debt to the borderland traders that grew teeth every season. Grull, eldest at 30, took the chief's stool and the chief's temper, and none of his patience. Borv, the middle, followed wherever Grull pointed. Dak, 24, soft-hearted in a way orcs are taught to be ashamed of, went along because going along was easier, and because Grull had a way of making the easy thing feel like the only thing. Then warlord Vergoth came riding up the valley, with 60 spears, and an offer that wasn't really an offer. Vergoth held the whole eastern reach, the deep pasture, the salt, the road tolls. He was old and fat in the way powerful orcs got fat. Fat is a thing that has never once gone hungry, and he wanted the Greytusk high ground because it commanded the only good pass north. He could have taken it with his spears, but taking it would cost orcs, and Vergoth was the kind who'd sooner spend a girl than a single one of his fighters. So, a bond. Khora to Vergoth. 2 holds joined under his banner, Grull's debts wiped. The longhouse honored. Grull actually used that word, and Khora had laughed out loud, which was the first thing that made him hit her. "You think Mother got to choose?" he'd said after a while she held a rag to her split lip. "You think anybody does?" "Mother chose Pa," Khora said. "She chose him at a frost feast and threw a boot at the orc her own father picked." Grull had no answer for that, so he did what orcs with no answer do, decided the conversation was over and walked away. That had been a week ago. Tonight had been the end of the asking. Tomorrow, Vergoth. Except there wasn't going to be a tomorrow at that gate. Khora had decided that, with her father's axe in her hands, and the deciding had felt better than anything had in 2 years. 3 valleys north, Silas Crowe heard the scream, and went still over his coffee. He was a human, which out here made him about as common as snow in summer. A lean, sun-cured man in his late 20s, a week of dark beard, a hat that had seen more weather than a coast. He'd been drifting the borderlands 3 years, taking the work a human could get, which in orc country was not much. Running tuskbacks for any hold that didn't mind a man's hands as long as his face stayed out of the longhouse. He was good at it. He was good at most things that didn't require staying anywhere. His fire was nearly out. His horse, a flea-bitten gray gelding named Pilgrim, dozed hipshot at the edge of the light. The drive he'd hired onto had ended yesterday. The pay light, the road ahead unwritten. And he'd been turning over the same dull question, sign on again, or move south where the folks were his own color, when the scream came up the wind. He knew the sound the way some men know weather. There was the celebration kind, loud and happy. The hunting kind, sharp and short. And then this third kind, the kind that had quit asking for help because it had given up on help ever coming. The kind that knew it was alone. He set down his coffee. "Aw, hell," he said to nobody, which was who he usually talked to. Most folks would have stayed put. A human alone in orc country had every reason to keep his hat low. Whatever was screaming down there was an orc problem, and orc problems had a way of turning into dead human problems if a fella stuck his nose in. He kicked dirt over the coals anyway. The thing was, and he'd never have said it out loud, Silas Crowe had spent 3 years not riding toward trouble, and it hadn't made him sleep any easier. He'd been riding away from one particular scream for a long time. He didn't think much about her in daylight, but nights had a way of bringing his sister's voice up out of the ground, the way cold brings up old aches. He'd been 17. There'd been men at the homestead, and she'd screamed his name, And Silas had done the smart thing, the surviving thing, hidden in the root cellar with a hand over his own mouth, and lived while she hadn't. So when a scream came up the wind now, he wasn't really deciding. He'd decided 10 years back, in the dark with dirt in his teeth, and he'd been waiting ever since for the chance to make it come out different. "What do you say, Pilgrim?" he murmured, cinching the saddle. The gray swiveled one unimpressed ear. "Let's go stick our nose somewhere it ain't wanted." Pilgrim, who had opinions, blew out a long, suffering breath, and they went down off the ridge into the dark. She lost the boars at the Black Water, a creek that pooled wide and slow in pale stone, lying flat and bottomless under the night sky. Khora waded in to her knees, gasping at the cold, and crossed at the shallows where the current would scrub her trail. Her feet had stopped hurting, which she knew was bad, the way she knew everything about rough ground. In her bones, not her head. On the far bank she heard them. Not close, but the war boars carried. That low grunting churn, the splatter of cloven feet in bog, and over it her brothers calling her name with promises she'd stopped believing 2 years back. "Come on home, Khora. Nobody's mad. Things'll be different." Lies every one, with her name on them. She got behind a boulder the size of a longhouse door and knocked an arrow with hands she could barely feel. She'd never shot a person. She found, crouched there, that she was entirely willing to start. That was when she heard the other sound, a different mount. Lighter feet. A horse. Nobody around here rode horses. "Hello," called a voice soft and flat and rounded off, an outsider's accent. A human's. "Easy now. I ain't looking to hurt nobody." Heard a scream a while back. Figured it weren't a happy one. "If you're in trouble, I got a horse and I got the night. And that's about all I got. But it's yours." "How do I know," Khora rasped, voice wrecked from screaming, "that you're not just a different kind of trouble?" A pause. When he answered, he sounded almost amused. "Ma'am, you don't. That's the honest hell of it. All I can give you's my word. And my word and 3 coppers'll get you a bad cup of beer most places. But I'll keep my hands where you can see 'em, and if you want to put an arrow in me to be sure, well, I've been shot before. Never improved my disposition, but I lived." Despite everything, something in her wanted to laugh. It was such an orc way to talk, that grim flat joke, and it was coming out of a human, which made no sense at all. She came around the boulder. The moon showed him, a tall, narrow man, both hands open and lifted, beside a gray horse. The top of his hat came about level with her eyes, and Khora wasn't an especially big orc. He looked at her, the war axe across her back, the bow, the bruise, the bare bleeding feet, and his face did none of the things she was braced for. No fear, no pity, which she'd have hated worse, just a flat, weathered attention, taking it in and setting it somewhere private. "My brothers," she said. The words stuck. "Behind me, 3 of 'em, on boars." He nodded slow, like she'd told him the weather. "Then we best not stand here jawing. You can ride double. Take the horse and I'll walk. Or go your own way and I'll wish you luck. But it's gotta be quick, on account of—" He tipped his head at the dark, where the boars grunted closer. That. A boar squealed. Near now. A brother's voice rose sharp. "Tracks go in the water." She crossed. "I ride," Khora said, "but I keep the axe. And the bow. And if you breathe wrong, human, I will open you up and read your insides like a clan augur." "Fair," said Silas Crowe without missing a beat. "Real vivid, but fair." He laced his fingers into a stirrup of his own hands to boost her up, which she did not need and let him do anyway, and a moment later they were both on Pilgrim's back, her in front with the axe across her knees, him behind, keeping a careful, deliberate inch of air between his chest and her shoulders. "Silas Crowe," he said low, turning the horse. "Khora Greytusk. Well, Miss Greytusk, let's go find somewhere your kin ain't." They rode the better part of an hour through broken country where the boars couldn't move fast. Khora twisted around every few minutes to scan the back trail, the axe never leaving her hands, but the grunting and the calling fell away by degrees until there was nothing back there but wind and stars. The horse's gait was strange to her. Orcs didn't ride horses, the beasts couldn't carry the weight. And the warmth of another living body at her back was stranger still. Slowly, against her will, the white noise panic began to bleed out of her, leaving a bone-deep, swaying exhaustion. She did not let go of the axe. He brought them at last into a hidden fold in the hills, a cleft of rock where a spring bubbled up cold and clear. Walled on 3 sides, hard to find and easy to defend. He knows this country better than an outsider's got any business knowing it, she thought. He swung down, stood well back, and offered a hand to help her down. She ignored it, got down herself, and nearly buckled when her ruined feet hit the ground. "Easy," he said, not touching her. "You're cut up bad. Sit. I got a blanket, hardtack, water. Ain't a feast, but it'll keep you breathing." She sat against the cold rock while he saw to the horse, and the whole weight of the night came down at once, like a roof falling slow. She had run. She'd put her father's axe to her brother's belly and run out into the dark. And now here she was, in a hole in the ground, with a human stranger. With nothing. No hold, no herd, no kin worth the name. By every measure she'd been raised to, she was ruined. And she had never felt less like crying and more like howling. Not from grief, but from something hotter she took a long moment to name. Joy. Ugly, terrified, half-frozen joy. She'd forgotten its shape. He came back with a wool blanket, a canteen, and hardtack that looked like it could chip a tusk, set them in her reach, and went off to gather wood. Without a word, "You mean to light a fire?" she asked. "They'll see the smoke. They'll see nothing. We're down a hole. The wind's blowin' wrong for 'em, and your kin'd have to be part bat to track in this dark." He glanced up. "Dry. Besides, you're shaking hard enough to bring down loose rock, catch a chill and die on me, and then your brothers tracked you for nothing. And I hate to see a man's hard work wasted, even a son of a bitch's." That did it. Khora laughed, a short, startled, broken bark that surprised them both, and then hurt, because it pulled the bruise on her face. The fire caught, small, low, hidden, warm. She pulled the blanket around her and stretched her wrecked feet toward it, and studied the human across the dancing light. Weathered, watchful, brown eyes that didn't judge her, which she kept being grateful for and kept resenting the gratitude. "Why did you help me?" she said finally. He poked at the fire. Heard a scream. The bad kind. Some things a fella can't ride past. Not and keep being a fella. He turned to Cole. "You want to tell me what happened, or just warm up and not talk? Either's fine. I ain't much of a talker. People keep telling me so. And they keep being right," she told him. She hadn't meant to. It came out anyway. The dead parents, the dying hold, the debts with teeth. Vergath fat and smiling and wanting her high ground, willing to take her along like a bull thrown in to sweeten a herd trade. Grull, who'd quit being her brother the season their parents went in the ground. Borv, who followed. Dak, who looked away. He said I'd be at the gate at first light. Smiling, he said he'd break every soft thing in me till there was nothing left to do but smile. Her hand had found the haft of the axe without being told. So I broke something of his first. Silas was quiet. When he spoke, his voice had gone flat in a different way. Flat the way still water is, right before a current shows under it. "Doc, the baby. He held you down?" "He didn't pull them off me, but he didn't hold me down either, not really. He just stood there. Let it happen. That's its own kind of holding you down," Silas said. "The standin' there kind. Don't leave a bruise. Leave something, though." Khora looked at him across the fire. This strange, small human who talked like a grim old orc and knew the exact shape of a wound she'd never had words for. She thought about asking how he knew. She didn't. There are questions you don't ask a stranger at a fire, The same way there are some you don't ask yourself. They won't quit, she said instead. Too much money in me now. Grull'll hunt me to the salt sea before he lets Vergat's deal walk off into the dark. Then he's got a long ride, said Silas, and lay back against his saddle with his rifle across his knees and his hat down over his eyes. Sleep, Miss Greytusk. I'll take first watch. And second, I ain't real partial to sleepin' anyhow. Me and it don't get along. She meant to argue. She meant to keep the axe in her hands and trust no human as far as she could spit a tusk. She was asleep before the fire burned halfway down, the axe loose in her grip. And the last thing she saw was the human sitting up against his saddle, brown eyes open in the dark, keeping a stranger's watch over an orc he'd known 1 hour, for no reason she could find, at the bottom of the world. Morning came hard and bright and honest. Khora woke with her hand already on the axe, not knowing where she was. Then it all came back. He was already up. Of course he was. A small fire, a battered tin pot, and the smell of real coffee. An outsider luxury she'd had twice in her life, both times stolen. Feet, Silas said, by way of good morning, nodding at her soles. Show me. She did, grudging, and watched his mouth go tight at the state of them. He dug out a little tin of salve and held it at arm's length, not coming closer than she'd allow. Lard and pine pitch, and a couple things a witch in the low country swore by. Stinks like a dead skunk's worse-smelling cousin. Works, though. She took it. He went back to the coffee. Now we ought to talk about where you're headed. You can't go home, can't go to Vergat's Reach, and them's the 2 closest places. So we're off to a tricky start. There is no we, Khora said, working the foul salve into the cuts. You found me. You're square. Ride on. Could, he agreed, holding out a dented cup. Gonna guess I won't, though. Drink that. It's terrible and you'll thank me. She drank. It was terrible she did privately thank him. There's a place, 3 days south and east, mining town. Silver in the hills, so it draws every kind. Humans, orcs, dwarves when they bother, a couple things I never got a name for. Folks there are too busy diggin' to care who you used to be or who's lookin'. Called Emberhold. Ain't pretty. But a body could get lost in it. Or found if a body wanted that instead. Khora turned the cup in her 2 big hands. South and east. Away from the cairn, the high pasture, the only life she'd known. Away from Grull, the gate, Vergat's fat smiling face and his 60 spears. Why, she said, for the second time. You don't know me. I'm nothing to you. I'm not even your kind. Silas was quiet. Then, looking at the morning, and not at her. Let's just say I rode past a scream once. Did the smart thing. Kept my hat low. Been finding out ever since there's some things you can't outride. They keep pace, real patient, like wolves that ain't in a hurry on account of they know how it ends. He set the cup down. So I don't ride past anymore. Ain't kindness exactly. More like I'm tired of being chased by something I can't see. Make any sense? No, said Khora. Then, yes. They broke camp under the climbing sun. He showed her how to wipe out their trail, better than good, moving over broken ground without leaving sign, and she found herself impressed and annoyed at being impressed. She rode behind him this time, a fist in the back of his coat. The axe slung, the bow strung, Pilgrim picked his careful way south, and for a few hours the world was just wind and stone and the sway of the horse, and Khora let herself believe, a little, that the worst was behind her. She should have known better. Orcs learn young. The worst of it is never the part chasing you. It's the part that's already gotten out ahead and is waiting. It was past midday when she saw them. They'd stopped to water the horse in a stand of black-barked trees, and out of pure habit she'd climbed a rise to read the back trail. And there, 3 valleys back, small as fleas but unmistakable, the slope of the shoulders, the set of the heads, 3 riders on war boars strung in a hunting line, scanning the ground. Her blood went to creek water. Silas. Ridge behind us. North. 3. He was up beside her in a breath, squinting north under the flat of his hand, and she watched his weathered face do the math and not like the answer. Boars track slow, but they track forever. They got our line. He looked south, at the open country between here and anywhere safe, miles of it bald, where a horse carrying two would stand out like a campfire on a dark plain. Old line shack maybe 5 mile on. Trapper's place. Fallen down, but it's got walls, a door, and high ground. He turned to her. No humor in him now. We run for it, or we make for it slow and quiet, and hope they lose us in the rocks. Your kin, your call. They the kind to back off if they're stared down? Or the kind that comes through the door? Khora looked north at the 3 small shapes. Grull, who meant it, Borv, who followed, Dak, who looked away, coming on slow and certain and patient as wolves that knew how it ended. Grull comes through the door, she said. Every time. It's the only thing about him I've ever been able to count on. Then let's go give him a door, said Silas Crowe, and they went down off the rise to the horse. They didn't make the line shack clean. The trouble with running from war boars is that boars don't tire the way a horse carrying two does. A mile from the shack, with the falling down roof of the place already in sight on its little knuckle of high ground, Pilgrim caught a hoof in a badger hole and went down hard onto his knees. Silas pitched over the gray's neck and hit the rock's shoulder first with a grunt that was more about embarrassment than pain, and Khora came off clean. Orcs land like cats, which is a thing humans never expect and rarely enjoy finding out. But the damage was done. They were afoot. The horse was scrambling up, favoring a foreleg, and the lead boar came churning out of the scrub not 40 paces off, with Borv hunched low over its bristled neck. Here is the thing Khora Greytusk expected. A terrified girl in a sleeping shift, scrambling, easy to scoop up. Here is what Khora Greytusk got. His sister, planting her bare feet wide in the rocks, drawing her father's bow smooth as a poured drink, and putting an arrow through the meat of his boar's shoulder. The boar screamed and bucked and sat down on its own haunches, and Borv went off the back of it in a flailing heap of cousin and curses. By the time he'd untangled himself, Khora had a second arrow nocked and aimed square at the place where his neck met his collar, and her hands were not shaking now. Not even a little. "Stay down, Borv," she said, and there was something in her voice that hadn't been there in the longhouse, something flat and certain and entirely her own. "I've fed you at that table. I've stitched your stupid head twice. I know exactly how much arrow it takes to put you down, and I am all out of patience and one short on brothers I'll miss." Borv stayed down. He was, whatever else, not a fool, or not all the way one. Behind her, Silas hauled himself up off the rocks, holding his shoulder, and took in the whole picture. The dropped boar, the cousin in the dirt, the orc woman standing over both with a bow drawn full and steady, lit up by the slant of the afternoon sun like something out of an old story. And Silas Crowe, who had ridden down into that dark valley the night before to rescue somebody, felt the entire shape of his understanding quietly rearrange itself. "Huh," he said to nobody. "Get the horse," Khora told him, not turning around. "Shack. Now, while they're sorting themselves out." He got the horse. The line shack was one room of mossy logs with a roof that sagged like an old mule's back, and a door hung crooked on leather hinges, but it had thick walls, a clear field of view down the slope on every side. And, Silas noted with grim approval, only the one window, which meant only the one direction a body had to watch at a time. They got Pilgrim into the lean-to out back, and Silas ran a hand down the gray's foreleg and found heat, but no break. "You'll live," he told the horse. You big embarrassment. Pilgrim, who felt the insult, was rich coming from a man who'd just gone over his neck like a sack of meal, declined to comment. Inside, Khora set her back to the wall by the window, and checked her arrows. 3 left now, while Silas thumbed cartridges into the rifle and counted them, and didn't like the count. 3, she said, watching him. There's 3 of 'em and 4 of us if you count the horse, and you shouldn't. It ain't the 3 I'm worried on, Silas said. He nodded out the window, where the brothers had regrouped at the bottom of the slope, well out of bow range, Borv limping, the wounded boar left behind. It's what's behind the 3. You said 60 spears. Vergath ain't gonna let a deal worth a whole high pasture ride off because one girl had opinions. The brothers are the dogs. Somewhere back there's the man holds the leash, and he ain't gonna call 'em off. He's gonna send more. Khora had no answer for that, because it was true, and she'd known it was true since the moment she ran. Out on the slope, an orc cupped his hands and bellowed up at the shack. Growl, his big voice carrying easy on the wind. Khora. A pause. Come on out, sister. This foolishness has gone on long enough. Nobody's got to get hurt today that don't already deserve it. Silas glanced at her. That's the eldest? That's Grawl. He always lead with a threat dressed up like Mercy. Every time, said Khora. It's practically his clan name. Silas looked at her a moment. The bruise gone from purple to a sick green-yellow now. The bow steady, the bare-cut feet planted on the dirt floor like she'd grown there. And then he did a thing she did not expect. He set the rifle down. He held it out, butt first, leaning it against the wall in easy reach of where she stood, and he walked to the crooked door empty-handed. What are you doing? She said. Not a question. A warning. Going out to talk, Silas said. A fella points a gun. The talkin's already over. I'd rather find out which kind of day this is gonna be before I find out the hard way. He paused with his hand on the door. You stay in here where the wall's at your back. You see me reach for nothing. You do whatever your gut says. I trust it better than I trust mine. And I just met it yesterday. And before she could tell him what a magnificent idiot he was, the human walked out the crooked door of a falling-down shack, to stand alone, unarmed, between 3 armed orcs and the only thing in the borderlands he cared about, which yesterday had been a stranger. They came up the slope slow, spreading wide the way hunters do. Grull in the center on his big boar, Borv on the left favoring his bad leg, Dak on the right hanging back, his young face miserable. Grull reined in 20 paces off and looked down at the lone human standing in the dirt, and his lip curled off one yellow tusk. This don't concern you, outsider, he said. We're after our sister. Family business. Heard about your family business, Silas said, easy, hands loose at his sides. Heard it kept your sister up nights. Heard it left a mark on her face about the size of your hand. He let that sit. Where I come from, a man that does that to his own blood don't get to call it family. He just gets to call it what it is. Grohl's knuckles whitened on his boar goad. You don't know one thing about it. Our hold is dying. The bond saves it. Saves all of us. Not all of you. Khora's voice came from the doorway, and every head turned. She stepped out into the light, the bow down at her side now but the axe across her back catching the sun. And she walked up to stand beside the human. Not behind him. Beside him. Just you, Grull. You and your pride and your debts. The hold doesn't need saving. It needs you to stop bleeding it to pay for things you broke. You ungrateful. I'd have worked the herd to the bone for that hold. She cut in, and her voice didn't rise, which was somehow worse. I'd have stood the musters and dug the graves and salted the meat through every winter we had left. I did do all that. But you never once looked at me and saw a Greytusk. You looked at me and saw a price. The wind went through the heather. Doc, on the right, had his eyes on the dirt, his big shoulders curled in like a child waiting for a blow. And it was Doc, not Grull, not Borv who broke first. I'm sorry, Khora, he said low and ragged. Last night, I should have pulled him off you. I knew it was wrong, and I just stood there. You held me down, Khora said. I didn't. You stood there and let it happen. And that's the same thing wearing a cleaner shirt. She looked at him, and there was no give in her. But there wasn't hate either. Just a terrible plain weariness. That's the part I can't get past, Dak. Not Grohl. Grohl I always knew. You, I trusted. Doc had nothing. His mouth worked, and nothing came out, and his eyes were wet, and an orc crying in front of his brothers is a thing that does not happen, which made it land all the harder. Grull saw the ground shifting under him, and did what Grull did. He went for force. Enough. He swung his boar a step forward, goad coming up. She's coming home one way or the other, and you, to Silas, are about to find out what happens to outsiders that get between an orc and his blood. Silas didn't move, didn't reach for anything. He just looked up at the big orc on the big boar and said, in that flat, rounded voice, "You can try me, friend. I'll tell you how it goes. On account of I been on the wrong end of bigger and meaner than you, and I'm still standing here boring you to death. But here's the part you ain't thought through." He nodded, slow, toward the shack, toward the window, toward the rifle leaned in the dark just inside it. "I came out here, unarmed, so we could talk. She didn't. And your sister can put an arrow through a boar's shoulder at 40 paces on the dead run. Ask Borv. His is still leaking. So before you do something that gets one of these boys killed over your pride, you might ask yourself, which two of your brothers are you willing to bury to win an argument with a girl who already beat you once tonight?" It was very quiet. Borv, who had personally tested the 40 paces claim and found it accurate, said, "Grull, maybe we ought to." "Shut up," Grull said, but the certainty had gone out of his voice, and they all heard it go. For one long, terrible moment, it could have tipped either way. Grull's hand twitched on the goad. His face worked through rage into something cornered and ugly. And then Borv put his good hand on his brother's arm, Borv the follower, the thumb-bitten one, and said quiet, "Look at her, Grull. Look at her face. Look what we did. I don't want to do more of it. I'm done. I'm going home." Something went out of Grull then. Not remorse. Khora knew her brother too well to call it that. But the wind left his sails, because a chief without orcs behind him is just one angry orc on a tired boar. And Grull had just watched the orcs behind him stop being behind him. "The hold fails without Vergoth's silver," he said, and it came out almost pleading. "Then let it fail," Khora said. "I'm not paying for it with my whole life. Not anymore." Grull looked at her a long moment. Then he spat in the dirt, hauled his boar around, and said over his shoulder, in a voice gone flat and cold, "You think this is over. It ain't mine to end. Vergoth's already hung a blood price on you. A runaway bond bride's a shame on his whole banner. And the old pig don't eat shame. He answers it. He'll send orcs you can't talk down, sister. Orcs that don't have a face you grew up with." He kicked the boar into motion. "I came to fetch you home. Next ones that come are coming to fetch your head." And the three brothers rode down off the slope and away. Grull not looking back, Borv casting one glance over his shoulder that might have been an apology if an orc could make his face do it, and Doc turning twice, 3 times, until the heather swallowed them. Only when they were small as fleas on the far ridge did Khora let the bow drop, and her hands finally begin to shake. Blood price, Silas said that night, by a fire they almost didn't risk. That as bad as it sounds? Worse. Khora turned a strip of jerky over the coals. Vergoth posts a price. Every glory-hungry young blade in the Eastern Reach starts dreaming about the orc who brought in the runaway bride's head and got pasture land and a warlord's favor for it. It's not 3 brothers anymore. It's everyone who ever wanted to be somebody. She stared into the fire. "I made myself worth more dead than I ever was alive. That's a strange thing to learn about yourself." Silas was quiet a while. Then, "So you can't run forever, and you can't go home, and there's a price on you in the only country you know." He poked the fire. "Sounds to me like what you need ain't a place to hide, it's a place to stand." somewhere with enough folks around it that a bounty orc has to think twice. And think about whether bringing a warlord's grudge down on a whole town is worth the favor. And you know such a place. I know Emberhold. He looked up. And I know something else. While we're laying cards down, there's a stead for sale just outside it. Old fella name of Garuk. Human, been there 40 years, raised it out of nothing. Wife's passed, son's gone off to the silver, and he's too stove up to work it and too stubborn to let it go to just anybody. Good water. 40 head of tuskback. A house with actual walls. He turned to Cole. I've been driftin' 11 years, Miss Greytusk. I'm tired down to the boot soles of it. I got a little money saved and not one earthly reason to keep movin'. And you know cattle, and you ain't afraid of work, and you got nowhere to be, but anywhere but here. Khora looked at him across the fire. You're asking me to. I'm asking you to be a partner, Silas said, and said it plain, before she could put a worse word on it. Not charity, not anything else. I can't work a whole stead alone, and you can't go it alone in country that wants your head. And two broke fools that each got half of what the other needs is the oldest arithmetic there is. You'd earn your share. Equal say, equal work, equal blame when it all goes sideways, which on a borderland stead it surely will. He shrugged, suddenly awkward, a man who'd said more words at once than he was used to. That's the whole offer. You can chew on it the 3 days it takes to get there. She chewed on it about 4 seconds. Equal say, she said. Equal say. Then I have one already. We're naming the boar that horse insulted today, and we're not eating it. I shot it, it lived. That makes it mine, and I name it Borv, after my brother. Because it's stubborn, and it bleeds easy, and I'd like to keep yelling the name at something. Silas Crowe looked at her for a second. Then he laughed. A real one, rusty, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. Partner, he said, and put out his hand. She took it. Her hand swallowed his whole. Neither one of them mentioned that. Emberhold, when they came down into it 3 days later, was exactly as ugly as advertised and twice as alive. It sat in a fold of the Silver Hills, 300 souls of every shape the borderlands could throw together. Broad orc miners with quartz dust in their tusks, lean humans running the assay and the freight. A clan of dwarves who dug in under the eastern slope and mostly kept their own counsel, and a scattering of folk Khora didn't have names for and was too polite to stare at. Nobody looked twice at an orc and a human riding double down the main street. Or rather, everybody looked once, clocked it, decided it wasn't the strangest thing they'd see that day, and went back to their business. After a lifetime of being the only kind of thing in the only kind of place, Khora found the indifference almost dizzying. Nobody here knew her name. Nobody here had a price on her. For about an hour, that felt like being weightless. The hour ended when an enormous old orc woman planted herself in the middle of the street and refused to be ridden around. You, she said, pointing one blunt finger up at Khora. She was old, silver-tusked, broad as a door, leaning on a stick she clearly did not need. And her eyes missed nothing. The fading bruise, the war axe, the human, the whole story of it read in one sweep. Off the horse. You look like you rode through a bad winter, and 3 worse decisions, and I've got broth and a fire, and no patience for arguing. The human can see to his own business. And yes, Crow, I know all about Garruk's stead. News doesn't travel in a town this size, it arrives ahead of you. That's Matriarch Braca, Silas murmured. She runs the hearth hall, and the gossip, and, near as I can tell, everything else that matters. You could do worse than be taken under that wing. So while Silas went to call on old Garruk, Khora sat in Braca's hearth hall with a bowl of the best broth she'd had since her mother died, and the old orc woman tactfully did not ask a single direct question while extracting the entire story anyway. The way only a matriarch can. A blood price. Braca clicked her tusks when Khora got to that part. From Vergoth, MHMF. I knew that one when he was a skinny pup with delusions before he ate his way up to delusions of grandeur. She refilled the bowl without asking. You'll want to know if it follows you here. It might. The Eastern Reach is a week's hard ride, but a fat enough price puts wings on a young fool's boar. She fixed Khora with those ancient eyes. But hear me, girl. This is Emberhold. We are orc and human and dwarf and stranger, and we have exactly one thing in common, which is that every last one of us came here to get away from somewhere that wanted us gone. A warlord's grudge means nothing to a town built out of other people's grudges. You understand me? You're not running anymore. You came down out of those hills into a place that knows what running is. Sit up straight. Khora sat up straight. She didn't entirely know why. Something in the old voice made her young again, in the good way. The way she'd been before the cairn. The blood price found Emberhold 11 days later. It came in the shape of 4 young orcs on lathered boars, hard-eyed and armored in Vergoth's black, riding down the main street at the hour the assay office was busiest. On purpose, so the whole town would see. Their leader was a broad, scarred buck with a warlord's brand fresh on his shoulder, and he reined up in the middle of everything and bellowed it out so it bounced off every storefront. We come for the Greytusk runaway, bond bride to warlord Vergoth, oath broke and gate shamed. The price is hung, pasture and favor to the hold that gives her up, and trouble to the town that hides her. He let his boar turn a slow circle, reading the gathering crowd, enjoying it. We know she's here. Bring her out, and Vergoth forgets your name. Don't, and he learns it real well. Khora was in the doorway of Bracca's hall. She'd known this might come. She'd told herself she was ready. And the old animal part of her, the part that had spent 2 years flinching, told her to run, out the back, into the hills, keep running, keep everyone safe by being gone. She took one step toward the street instead, and found she couldn't get to it, because old Garuk was already standing in the road, leathery and bent and absolutely immovable, his battered scattergun cradled like a thing he'd forgotten he was holding, and beside him a dwarf with a pick over one shoulder. And behind them 3 orc miners, quartz dust still on their arms, big as Grull and not the least bit afraid. And humans from the freight yard, and a woman with a flour sack apron and a cleaver, and more coming out of every door, until the 4 young blades on their lathered boars were sitting in the middle of a street that had quietly, without a word, filled up wall to wall with Emberhold. And in front of all of them, leaning on a stick she did not need, stood matriarch Bracca. "Boy," she said, and her old voice carried farther than the brand-fresh buck's bellow had. "You rode a long way to make a very loud mistake. There's no Greytusk runaway here. There's a partner in Garuk's stead, a free orc who came to this town the same way the rest of us did, one step ahead of somebody who thought they owned her." She took one step forward, and 4 armored boars shifted back without their riders telling them to. "You go on home and you tell that fat old pig Vergoth that Emberhold heard his price. And tell him we all laughed. Tell him there's 300 of us and we don't do shame here, we ran out of room for it on the way in. And tell him," she smiled, and it was a terrible old smile, full of silver and history, "that if he wants to spend his orcs buying one girl's head off a town that's already said no, he should send more than 4 pups who can't count past the crowd they're standing in." The scarred buck looked around the street. He did the arithmetic Silas had taught his betters. 4 against 300. He was young, but he wasn't in the end a fool, or not all the way one. They rode out the way they came, slower, to the sound of 300 borderlanders not saying one word, which is the loudest sound there is. Khora stood in the doorway with her hand pressed flat to the frame, and for the second time in 2 weeks, she found she had no idea what to do with the thing rising up in her chest. She'd faced down Grull and felt fury. She'd faced down the slope and felt cold. But this, a whole town of strangers stepping into the road for an orc most of them had known 11 days, this was something she had no name for at all, and her eyes stung. And Bracca turned and caught her at it. and had the grace to pretend she hadn't. "Don't go soft on me now, girl," the old orc said, thumping past her into the hall. "We've a stead to set you up in, and Garruk's broth is terrible. And you've got a partner out there somewhere fixin' a roof and missing every nail he swings. I'd put silver on it." She paused in the doorway. "Welcome to Emberhold, Khora. You're one of us now. Worse luck for you." Out past the rooftops, the silver hills went gold in the late light, and somewhere among them was a falling-down stead with good water and 40 head of tuskback and a stubborn boar named Borv, and a human, up a ladder, swinging at a nail and missing, who had heard a scream in the dark and ridden toward it, and in doing so had ridden clean off the edge of the only life either of them had ever expected to get. The first thing they agreed on, standing in the dusty front room of old Garruk's stead, was the sleeping arrangements. 4 rooms down, 2 up, Silas said, turning his hat and very carefully studying the rafters. "I'll take the lean-to off the kitchen. You take whichever suits, far apart as the house allows." "Why so far?" Khora asked, just to watch him squirm. "On account of Braca runs a town council, and Braca's council has opinions about an unwed orc and an unwed human under one roof, and I'd sooner face Burgat's whole banner than face Braca's opinions." He cleared his throat. "Also, it's the decent thing. You've been handled enough by folks who didn't ask. I aim to be the one man in your life that keeps to his own side of the house till you say different, if you ever do, which is your business entirely. And I'll thank my own mouth to stop talking now." Khora took the room at the top of the stairs, with a window that looked east toward the hills she'd come down out of. The first few weeks she slept with the axe in reach out of pure habit. Around the 2nd month she noticed it had migrated to the wall peg, and she hadn't put it there on purpose. They built the thing slow, the way you build anything meant to last. Old Garruk stayed a week to show them the bones of the place, where the water ran sweet and where it ran iron, which tuskbacks were trouble and which were just loud. He and Khora got on from the first afternoon, when he watched her read a sick heifer's gut by feel the way his dead wife used to. On the day he left, he shook Silas's hand, then gripped Khora's forearm in the orc way. "Wrist to wrist. Land's good to them that respect it," he said gruff. "You both look at it right. You can read a person by how they look at dirt." And he climbed onto the freight wagon and didn't look back, the way men who feel too much don't. After that it was just the 2 of them and more work than there was day to hold it. Silas ran the heavy end, the herd, the fences, the long cold rides to check the high lines. Khora took the house, the garden she carved out of Garruk's wife's old plot, the ledger and the trading. But they bled across the lines constant, Silas elbow-deep in the canning when the garden came in heavy, Khora riding the herd beside him when the work wanted 4 hands, and she could shoot a wolf off a calf at a distance that made him take his hat off in respect. It was a fair partnership, and a good one. And somewhere in the ordinary days of it, Silas lingering at breakfast to hear her plans, Khora keeping coffee hot when he rode in frozen off the High Line. The 2 of them on the porch watching the hills go dark in a quiet neither had ever shared with another soul. It started turning into something neither had the nerve to name. Then, in early summer, Silas came back from Emberhold with something wrapped in oilcloth across his saddlebow, so cussedly awkward about it that she knew she was in trouble of a new kind before he unwrapped it. It was a ridge pipe. An old one, orc-made, the long-carved drone pipe the hill clans played at the cairns and the frost feasts, the kind of thing a human had no earthly reason to know the value of. "You said your ma played," Silas mumbled, not meeting her eye. "Back at that first fire. Said it the way folks say things they've quit letting themselves miss." He scratched his neck. "Fellow in town was using it for a door prop. I traded him a month of work, and he thought he robbed me. Wants tuning, probably. I wouldn't know. Tone deaf as a fence post." Khora took the pipe in her 2 big hands. She had not held one since her mother died. That night, after he'd gone to his side of the house, she sat alone in the dark kitchen and played the first thing her mother ever taught her, a low, rough, mournful hill tune that filled the whole stead up like water filling a cup, and from the lean-to room where the human lay listening and not coming out, not intruding. Just there, she heard him let out one long breath, the way a man does when something he didn't know he was carrying gets set down. The house had needed music. Neither said so. Both knew. The letters started in midsummer, in Dak's blocky, careful hand. Nora, the first one, began, the human name their mother gave her at birth, before the clan name took that only Dak ever used. He was sorry. He knew sorry didn't fix it. He was learning the herd figures she used to keep, getting them wrong, and it had taught him exactly how much she'd done that nobody ever thanked her for. He didn't ask to visit. He just asked if she'd let him write. She let him write. Borv wrote too. Eventually. Shorter. Stiffer, but real. Of Grull there was little. He'd quit the hold, sold his share to his brothers, and gone east to hire his axe to some warlord's muster, chasing the only thing he'd ever loved, which was being owed. And of Vergoth, the best news came sideways. The old warlord had been so busy nursing the shame of one runaway bride that a rival banner came down off the salt and took 2 of his pastures and most of his attention, and a warlord at war has no silver to spend on old grudges. The blood price didn't get lifted. It just quietly stopped mattering, the way a fire goes out when nobody feeds it. In late summer, Doc came in person. She watched her enormous baby brother ride up on a borrowed horse, looking like a bear on a hound, and stood in the yard with her heart going and didn't know which way it would break. It was not a clean reconciliation. There aren't any. But she let him stay to supper, and Silas, who'd come around the barn with a hand near the rifle until she called him off, ended up teaching the boy to mend a harness, and by the time the stew was gone, the 2 of them were arguing tuskback bloodlines like old hands. In the barn that night, Doc told Silas something, and the human came in with a strange soft look, and wouldn't say what until she pried it loose days later. He said he'd never seen you happy before, Silas told her on the porch, watching the dark come down. Not once in his whole life. Saeed, he didn't know that's what your face was doing till he saw it here. He turned his hat, said it like a man finding a word for a thing he'd looked at all along. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. They sat with it in the good quiet while the hills went black. The festival came in the first cool of autumn. Emberhold's Silver Strike Day, when the whole ugly, beautiful town hung its one street with lanterns and somebody's fiddle got going, and orc and human and dwarf all got drunk enough to dance with each other, which in the borderlands counts as a miracle of diplomacy. They had never danced in all those months of careful inches and kept sides of the house. They'd touched only when the work demanded it. So when the fiddle slid into a slow one, and Silas stood and held out one weathered hand, not asking with words, asking with the whole of him ready to be told no and live, Khora looked at that small open hand a long moment. Then she put hers in it. They were both terrible, but the worse they were, the less it mattered, because nobody in that drunk lantern-lit street was watching, and the music carried them through the parts their feet couldn't. Somewhere in the third turn his hand settled light and certain at the curve of her waist, and hers found the warm plane of his shoulder, and the careful inch they'd kept between them all those months just closed. Quiet. Like a door easing shut on a room you'd been cold standing outside of. When the tune ended, they stepped apart, but the closed inch rode home with them under the stars and lay down on both sides of the house and kept them both awake. The storm broke it open 3 days later, down off the hills with no manners and no warning, trapping them in the house through a long gray afternoon. Khora was elbow-deep in bread dough, the rain loud enough to hide a heartbeat, when she felt Silas stop his harness work and just watch her, with a weight that had been building for weeks. "Khora," he said, low under the rain, "there's a thing I've been carrying that I got to set down, and I'll do it badly, on account of I do everything badly except cattle and silence." She stilled her hands. The bread forgot itself. "I rode into that valley to help somebody. Figured I'd see you safe and ride on and finally sleep a night through." He looked up, and there was nothing flat in his eyes now. I have not rode on. I'm not gonna. Somewhere between that creek and this kitchen I quit being a man passing through, and turned into a man who can't picture one morning he'd want that didn't have you arguing with him across it. I love you. Not like a partner, though you're that. The way a man loves the one place he finally quit running from. He drew a breath. And I know the last orc who wanted you held you down to prove he owned you. I'd sooner cut off my own hand than be one more thing in your life that grabs without asking. So I ain't grabbing. I'm asking. That's the whole of it. The rain came down. Flour dusted the table. Khora looked at this small, stubborn, honest human who'd ridden toward her scream, and then kept to his own side of the house for half a year, so she'd never have to flinch again, and understood all at once that this was the thing she'd actually run for that night. Not safety, not even freedom, the choosing, the right to put her hand somewhere because she wanted to, and not because a knee was in her back. You want the difference between you and Vergoth, she said. Steady. He held me down and called it a bond. You're standing across a table covered in flour, asking. She came around the table. He didn't move, didn't reach. He'd meant the asking. Every word. Ask me the rest. Plain. Will you have me? He said. Not as a partner. The whole thing. A life. A name if you want it, none if you don't. Whatever you choose, long as it's chose. I'll have you, said Khora Greytusk, and closed the last inch herself. The bread never did get made. The storm blew 3 days, and the stead was an island of warm light in the gray of it. Groll came back at the turn of the year, the day before the frost feast, before the bonding rite bone-caller Olga had agreed to come speak over them. A mixed thing of orc words and human ones, both that had scandalized exactly nobody in Emberhold, and delighted Braca to her silver roots. Khora was hanging cairn greens over the door, when a single rider came up the track on a tired boar, and her whole body knew the slope of those shoulders before her eyes caught up. The old flinch came back so hard she had to grab the frame. Silas was beside her in a breath, rifle in his hands but not raised. That who I think. That's Groll. He looked terrible. Thinner, older than his 31 years, the muster life having given him exactly what it gives everyone who chases being owed, which is nothing. He got down stiff and stood turning his hat, and could not, for a long moment, make himself look at her. Heard about tomorrow, he said finally to the dirt. Dak wrote me. I won't stay for it. Wouldn't be right, me standing in that crowd. He started over, and it visibly cost him, every word dragged up from somewhere rusted. I came to say it to your face. Vergoth was wrong, and Pa would have been ashamed, and I knew both those things the whole time and did it anyway. I held my own sister down to sell her for silver. There's no clean word for it, and I'd do anything to take it back. And I can't. I'm not here for forgiveness, Khora. I haven't earned a thimble of it. I just couldn't let you stand up tomorrow thinking nobody who shared your blood was sorry for what your blood did to you. The yard was very quiet. Silas had gone still as the fence posts, leaving it to her, the way he left her everything that was hers. It was unforgivable, Khora said at last. Not cruel. True. You'd have spent my whole life to buy a few more years of yours. I won't stand here and tell you it's washed, because it isn't, and you'd know I was lying. Groll nodded, taking it, not flinching, the first grown thing she'd ever watched him do. But you rode a week on a tired boar to say a thing that gains you nothing and costs you the only thing you've got left, which is your pride. That's more than you were a year ago. So you'll come in, out of the cold. It's not forgiveness, it's broth. Don't confuse them. He reached into his coat then, slow, and brought out something wrapped in soft hide. It was their mother's tusk pendant, the carved bone disc she'd worn all her life, the one Pa gave her at the frost feast she chose him, the one Khora had assumed was sold years back to pay the debts. I never could sell it, Groll said, rough. Tried twice, couldn't. It was always yours. She'd have said so. He pressed it into her hands and closed her huge fingers around it with his own. Wear it tomorrow. Let one thing of theirs be there, even if I can't be. Khora opened the disc with her thumb the way her mother used to, and inside was the tiny portrait etching of the two old orcs on their own bonding day. Young, tusked, grinning like fools, full of a future neither got to finish, and the thing rose up in her chest that had been rising all year. And this time, she let it come. Stay the night, she said when she could talk. Just the night. You can't come tomorrow, you're right about that. But you can chop the wood for it. That's a job for somebody who owes a debt he can't pay. Make yourself useful, big brother. For once, Grull went to chop the wood. From the window she watched the two of them out by the block in the last light, the human and the orc who'd hunted her. An axe trading hands, low words she couldn't hear. When Silas came in, she asked what he'd said. Told him you were the strongest thing I ever met, Silas said, hanging his hat. Told him I was grateful every day you chose to stand next to me instead of run, which you'd every right to do. And I told him if he ever came at your piece again, I'd answer it personal and slow, and he wouldn't hear me coming. He shrugged. He said he expected nothing less. Then he asked me to pass the wedge. We get along about as well as two fellas can who both nearly got each other killed. Which, out here, is pretty well. They were bonded the next day, the eve of the frost feast, in the front room of the stead with 24 guests crammed shoulder to shoulder. Dak and Borv in front, scrubbed and weeping and trying to hide it. Braca presiding like a silver-tusked empress. Garuk come all the way up from the low country. The dwarf clan, the miners, the freight yard humans. Bone-collar Olga spoke the orc words, then stumbled kindly through the human ones, and Khora stood with her mother's pendant at her throat and her father's axe over the door behind her, and put her hand into Silas Crowe's because she wanted to, because nobody made her, because the whole point of the long, terrible year had been the freedom to do exactly this small, enormous thing. What gods there are, Olga rumbled. And what gods there ain't. Witness it. These two chose each other. No price was paid, no hold was bought. No one was owned. The old shaman's tusked face cracked into almost a smile, which where I come from is the only kind of bond worth the name. Kiss her, outsider, before the broth gets cold. He kissed her. The room came down in a roar. 1 year on, Khora stood in the doorway of the O'Brien Greytusk stead. They'd hyphenated it, to the lasting confusion of the Emberhold post, and watched her husband ride in from the south pasture in the long gold light. And even now that smile he got when he caught sight of her turned something over in her chest. The herd had near doubled. There was a new room built onto the east side, small and warm, with a cradle Doc had carved over the winter, and a window that looked at the hills she no longer flinched at. Silas crossed the yard in long strides, taking off his hat, and laid one careful hand on the swell of her belly, the way he did 12 times a day, like he still couldn't believe it was allowed. "How's my favorite outlaw?" he said. And the small one fixing to be born sideways out of pure stubbornness. Kicking. Braca says any day. The midwife says 3 weeks. I trust Braca. He grinned and felt the kick, and his face did the soft thing it only did out here. Doc had married the schoolteacher in the spring, a quiet human woman named Rebecca, who looked at the big orc like he hung the moons, and the two were expecting their own come summer. Borv ran the old hold now, the debts gone, the herd healthy, and Grull wrote sometimes from the muster road, short, rough letters that asked real questions and waited for real answers. A man learning very late how to be related to people instead of owed by them. It wasn't fixed. Some things don't get fixed. But it was something, and something was a country away from where they'd started. That evening they sat on the porch, the way they had 1,000 times, her head on his shoulder, the silver hills going dark and the first stars coming out. The same stars, she always thought, that had watched her run barefoot and screaming through the heather a 1.5 years gone, with 5 arrows and a dead orc's axe, and not one reason to think the night would end anyway but badly. "You ever think about it?" she said soft. "That night, when you heard me. Some nights," he said, thumb moving slow on her shoulder, "usually when I wake up and you're there, and I think on all the ways I almost wasn't the kind of fella who rides toward a scream instead of away." He pressed his mouth to her hair. "Best thing I ever did was the thing I almost didn't do. You give yourself too little. I made the first choice, Silas. To run, to fight, to put Pa's axe to Grull's belly and walk out that door. Nobody handed me that." She turned her mother's pendant over in her fingers, the way she did when she wanted to feel the whole long road of it at once. "But you made yours too. To ride down, to stand in front of 3 armed orcs with empty hands, to keep your own side of the house half a year, so I'd learn a man could want me and still wait to be asked." She laced her huge fingers through his small ones. "We both chose. And we keep choosing. Every plain, ordinary day we choose it again. That's the whole secret. There isn't another one." "Best choices I ever made," Silas said. "Every one had you in it." The dark came down soft over the silver hills, and the small one kicked, and the stead glowed warm at their backs. And Khora Greytusk, who had once been worth more dead than alive, who had run into the night with nothing and come out the far side of it with everything, sat in the arms of the man who'd heard her scream and answered it. Not with a chain, not with a price, not with a knee in her back, but with an open hand, a careful question, and the simple, unkillable decency of riding toward the thing that scared him. It was everything she had never once let herself want. That night she fled into the dark, and everything, every last warm, ordinary, impossible thing that she would cherish for all the days that came after. The end.